So just a pair of things before we get started with this episode 1.5. I'm trying to offset myself from the dev streams, so since there is a dev stream this week when this episode 1.5 and its 2 parts post, I just want to get episode 2 in on next week's time, because that way if the devs say something awesome that I want to react to, that gives me the opportunity to do so instead of being on the same weeks that the dev streams might be queuing. And at the same time, I do want to have a State of the Frame full episode every other week. So the other thing I want to mention before we get into it is that the first episode of State of the Frame had a lot of the long videos. I'm going to try and cut those down a lot. So with that in mind, let's get right into it. So the ramble I want to get into for the first half of this episode 1.5 is the discussion around armor and how it has basically been brought back into the spotlight. I don't have any specific footage for this, so here's Nova in a sortie with the Sobek. Basically, what I want to talk about has a lot to do with Brozime's video, highlighting why armor is so important in the game, or removing that armor against enemies. And I also want to talk about, I believe it was DevStream 78 or 79, where it was brought up that perhaps shields need to be looked at, whether that applies to the Corpus or applies to Warframes that have larger shields or potentially rely on shields for survival, one such frame being Mag. And I think that there are two sides to this argument, and when I was talking to a friend of mine from my clan in-game about this and why he sides with this, I think he had a good kind of quote, I guess you will say, about confirmation bias, where he has always kind of leaned towards armor when it comes to Warframes, and leans towards this idea that there does seem to be an inherent imbalance, with Grineer being imbalanced by comparison to the Corpus and the Infested. And basically, he was saying that it's, confirmational bias, that basically there is armor is it. Armor is king right now. And I don't disagree with that. That's the thing. I don't disagree with that sentiment. It's just that I don't think that it needs to be looked at until it is necessary from the point of storytelling. And not everybody's going to agree with that either. This is basically where I think the other side of this argument lands. The Grineer are the big bad within the Origin system right now. That is not only their role in a technical standpoint from where the game stands, where the actual gameplay stands itself, but where the perspective of the storytelling is at. Basically, that the Grineer have been the big bad, the evil doers, the bad faction that needs to be controlled. And I think that the way the story stands, the Corpus are meant to be a corporation that isn't really seeking control like the Grineer are. The Infestation is just that. It is an infestation that is at times somewhat out of control, but not more than that. And I think that from a storytelling perspective, when you look at the Bombards and the Heavy Gunners, they are basically walking tanks that kind of almost in a sense of what Germany had. They had superior armor and mechanizations. And I think that is important to consider the other side of this, where it is from the point of storytelling. Because it seems like we're going to come to a head with things with the leaders of the Grineer faction, the Twin Queens, in the War Within. And I think that when you look at other games or even things in the real world, if you looked at World War II, Britain didn't go to the Germans and didn't say, like, guys, you're a bit imbalanced right now. I mean, maybe, you could take the treads off your tanks, or, take those wings off your planes. Like, this seems a bit unfair. And while it's funny, it's just something that doesn't happen. You don't see that in Destiny, where it's just like, well, the Cabal, they really aren't really any kind of threat right now, so maybe they should be completely balanced with the Hive or the Fallen. I think, yeah, those are the other factions, or the Vex. Same thing for the Division or World of Warcraft, or a lot of these games that have multiple different factions within a kind of persisting gaming world. There isn't, and I think there is a point to what Brozime is saying about how strong armor is. I do think, while I don't care that there is an imbalance, I think the imbalance is a bit gross. It's a bit of a gross imbalance, but it's not like there shouldn't be an imbalance. From a storytelling perspective, the Grineer are the big bad. They're the ones trying to control the origin system. It makes sense. And when you look at things that Scott and Steve have even said about they want to get back to the Corpus, they want the Corpus to start rising up again, I think that could be very soon. It could be after the War Within, or they said that basically the Second Dream and the War Within are a part of a trilogy, and Umbra being in that trilogy, basically after that trilogy concludes, we might see where the Corpus start to rise again, or potentially the Infested have some kind of resurgence. And these things are told through story, but also told to us through gameplay, where, yes, the big bads, the real threats, are the Grineer, and rightly so, because that's not only happening in story, but it's being told to us through gameplay. Now, at first glance, that idea of holding story up or storytelling through gameplay up over the gameplay experience itself might seem a bit odd to some, or even many, but I want to bring up Spectres of the Rail. Now, Spectres of the Rail was fine for what it did for the game, and I think in the long term, the game will be better off for Spectres of the Rail. However, when you look at Spectres of the Rail just upon its blanket release, it didn't really bring much else to the game other than some facelifts initially. And I think that it's important because when new things are introduced to the game, it's nice to have them introduced through events, through story sequences, or through just different mission types, possibly even a revamped assassination. But with Spectres of the Rail, we didn't get that. And when we bring up shields, and I'll talk about shields in a second, when we bring up armor and shields and there possibly being a problem, this could present this feeling of rush, a feeling of instant need within the community, within Warframe. And instead of getting an awesome event that could reason why Corpus are starting to upgrade their shields and how the Warframes will then additionally adapt their shields, instead we might just see, well, here's some shield mods, and that's it, and, we'll start upgrading the Corpus as well. I really don't like this sense of rushing the developers. I like that they're holding back the War Within, that they delay it, because I want it to be the fullest it can be. I feel like Spectres and just the overhaul to the star chart was not the fullest it could be, and I think that others might agree with that sentiment, that we want to see things being the fullest that they can be. And I don't want armor or shields to be rushed in adjustment. Scott and Steve, over time, have said that they want the Corpus to have a resurgence soon. That, of course, may have been delayed by things with the delays to War Within. That might not be seen until this supposed trilogy that is happening with the Second Dream and the War Within, and obviously the third part to come. But, so, since we're on shields, let's talk about shields. Basically, along with armor being brought up, shields were brought up in DevStream 78 or 79, and give or take one on that number, I'm not entirely sure which DevStream that was, but it was brought up in a player question, and it was talked about how shields are basically the one thing that prevent us from being one-shot, and they're the thing that protect the corpus, but of course the corpus don't really have anything protecting most of them other than their shields, but, I mean, who cares about the corpus? It's really about us, right? No, I'm kidding. But on that note, the Tenno the Tenno and the Warframes are kind of sentient-like in the way that they adapt to their enemies. They take their enemies' technologies and they adapt. The same thing could be said of the way you look at our armor. The Grineer are the big bad, and they have superior armor, and we have excellent armor on a number of our Warframes. And that, in turn, could be because the Grineer have excellent armor. So when the Corpus, say, upgrade their shields and have a shield that actually covers their health or something from, say, toxic damage, the thing that allows us to simply bypass shields, then we could be looking at an opportunity for Warframes to upgrade. And that could be told through gameplay, through storytelling through gameplay, or just simply storytelling. And these elements are important. And I think that there is that other side to the community that also sees that, where, again, there was this kind of confirmational bias for those who feel like armor is super strong right now. And as such, it should be through the state of the game. But eventually, we'll probably be able to see shields obtain that too. And then there is that kind of third side to things, where we're experiencing the game development process. The game is not only growing as we play it, but it's growing with us, and it's growing because of us. Things are happening because of community input, and that's a very rare thing within games, and we get to experience that with Warframe. We get to experience that with the developers, and I think that it's also important not to lose that this is kind of one of those maybe pivotal adjustments to the game where shields become more viable, and it could simply be done through gameplay, through storytelling, instead of just, okay, you guys wanted shields, here's the adjustment to shields. I really think it's important to let the experience, the development experience, the gameplay experience happen as it should over time. And there are certain things that, yes, should have adjustments. Warframes getting their reworks or their tweaks should just happen, and they don't necessarily need the storytelling experience to get those reworks or adjustments. But for me, when I think of storytelling and the Grineer being the dominant force within the solar system, the origin system, the star chart, it makes sense, and when the Corpus supposedly have their resurgence, it will make sense too, to have them upgrading themselves, having new units, receiving new mods from those new units, or an event, or a tactical alert, what have you. Opportunities to, again, experience through gameplay.